Okay, so in the mid-80s, Yamaha released the SHS-10 Keytar, and then a couple years later, the SHS-200, which I have here. And they were basically just toys. They had these mini keys, the sounds are those classic toy-ish like FM sounds. But the one thing the people over at Yamaha decided to incorporate as well is a MIDI output. And so I think many people like me found it very tempting to buy one of these for their retro, vintage looks. But then, thanks to that MIDI out port to be able to use great sounding virtual synthesizers. The question is just how far can you take it? Like, does this thing only send out MIDI note messages, or can you use any of these buttons to maybe send out some MIDI CC information? And what about program changes, clock messages? You know, what's the deal with that? So in today's video, I'm gonna go explore just that. And if you don't have the SHS-200, but maybe you have the SHS-10, don't worry, because they are basically the same. So I think 99% of this video is going to apply to the SHS-10 as well. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open MIDI Pipe, and this is a little free utility you can get on your Mac. I think there's an equivalent for Windows as well. It's called Bomis MIDI Converter or something. And basically, without going too much into depth about this, you have a variety of different tools, like, you know, for instance, a transpose utility or a message converter to turn notes into CCs or whatever. And the reason I'm using this is because it has this A-list utility, which allows you to monitor whatever MIDI information is being sent to this utility. So this is going to give us definitive proof that certain MIDI messages can be sent or not. So let's build our custom pipe, which you can do here on the right. I'm going to grab the MIDI in module and drag it here, and I'm going to select, well, I might want to turn on my unit first. As you can see, I'm using a MIDI over Bluetooth dongle here. So now, there we go. We have the MIDI master among our options here, and that is my MIDI input. And then I'm gonna use this A-list module. And as you can see, there's already a bunch of messages being sent continuously, and those are real-time active sensing messages. And I don't know what those are specifically, but I think they pertain to the status of certain controllers, and it's something that gets updated all the time. So we don't really need to worry about that. So I'm going to deactivate monitoring those. And as you can see, it stopped. But everything else we're still monitoring. So let's get the obvious out of the way. If I press any note, as you can see, a note on, and upon release a note off, message is being sent. We have 4 octaves on this controller. I think you have 2 or a little more than 2 on the SHS-10, and you can go from C1 to C5, it seems. Let me drag this up a bit. Now, 2 things to notice. The first one, all note off messages have a value of 0, which makes sense, but every single note on message, as you can see, has a value of 64. No matter how hard or soft I press the keys, it always sends a value of 64. So this thing isn't velocity sensitive. This might be a bit of a turn off for you. Me personally, I don't mind, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because I'm using this to play synth solos most of the time. And on my solo patches, I don't actually want velocity to be a factor. I don't want to have a lower output volume when I press the keys more softly and a higher output volume when I press them more hardly, because I want consistency. And so velocity isn't something I would be using anyway, and so it's not that big of a deal for me. But of course, if you want some piano parts, then it is kind of a big deal. And in that case, I think the only thing you can do really is to edit those velocities manually by hand, which is what I do whenever I need to record a piano part. So that being said, the second thing is you can actually have access to a little more than just those 4 octaves. So there are some parameters here in the parameter change section, which are tempo, transpose tuning, accompaniment volume, and MIDI channel, and then you have a minus and a plus button. And so these, while they don't actually send out MIDI information directly, they allow you to change some of the controls that actually do send out MIDI information. So if I press transpose, notice how my display here says 0, meaning there is no transposition happening. If I press the minus button 12 times, as you can see, now we go all the way down to C0. Now press the plus and minus button at the same time, you reset the transposition, and the lower note is now C1 again. Same thing up here. Normally C5 is the highest we can get, but we could transpose that up by 12 semitones, and now we get C6, reset, and it's C5 again. So that's the second thing I wanted to tell you about the keys here. You do have access to 4 octaves at the time, but in total you get 6 octaves, right? On the SHS-10 it's probably 2-ish octaves, which become 4-ish octaves. So that's it in terms of the notes. Now the second most obvious thing is the pitch bend controller here. And as you can see, it does indeed send out pitch wheel information. And the interesting thing about this, seeing as you would normally play the Keytar like this, whenever you move this like that, it goes down, so it pitches down. And wherever you move it towards you, it pitches up. And that might not be what you're most comfortable with, so you might want to change the orientation of the pitch bend wheel. You can do that, just move it either way, up or down, and then press the minus key. Right? Let me actually show this to you by playing some sounds. I'm gonna activate the volume here, right? Beautiful. So, as you can see, I was moving it to where it says down, but it was actually pitching notes up. And by 12 semitones, so by an octave, I can reduce that by maybe just making it 2 semitones. Or I could reset this to +2. So now it pitches up whenever I drag the wheel towards me. So you can change the intensity and the orientation of this. So yeah, let me turn the volume back down and let's continue. Now, next on our list here are these 3 effect buttons. And it says here vibrato, portamento, and sustain. And if you're familiar with MIDI CCs at all, then those 3 names are nothing new to you, right? Sustain usually is CC number 64, portamento is number 65, and vibrato would be the modulation wheel control, which is CC number 1. Let's go ahead and check if these actually check out in MIDI pipe as well. So I'm going to press the vibrato button. And as I keep it pressed, you can see it sent out a modulation wheel message with a value of 64. And when I release the button, it sends the value of 0. Good. So let's check portamento as well. Press and release. The CC number is 65, which is portamento, makes sense. And then sustain is CC64, which is the damper pedal. Now, interestingly enough, while sustain and portamento are kind of on-off switches, right? You press and you send the maximum value, as you can see here, of 127. You release and you send the minimum value of 0. You can actually change the intensity of vibrato. And the way to do this is just like with the pitch bend wheel. You press the button and then you press the plus key a couple times. And now you can already see that the max value is now 127, right? I press it, I press the button, it sends a value of 127, I release it, it sends 0. Or you could reduce the intensity of it to maybe 32 seems to be the minimum, so let's set it back to where it was at 64. And I think the most interesting way to check out what these can do is to control some sounds in Ableton as well. So let me open Ableton, right. So now let me load up my synthesizer of choice, which is Vital, and I have a preset here that's called Shred. I have assigned the modulation wheel to, change some vibrato on the pitch. So I'm going to play some notes and then activate and deactivate the modulation wheel. Let me bring MIDI pipe to the front. Since my MIDI output from the SHS-200 is going into MIDI pipe, we need to create a MIDI out as well. There we go. Here's me pressing a note and then applying some vibrato. And you will see whenever I press the button, something down here will light up. Right? You could hear the vibrato being applied. Now let's see if we can apply some more vibrato. Let's set this all the way to 5 on the display here on the SHS, which is equivalent to 127. So now the effect should be much more pronounced. And it is. And if we set this to maybe 1, which is the lowest value, which is 32, it should be a very weak effect. Right? So I think 3 is actually kind of a sweet spot in between those two. And then the interesting thing about MIDI CCs, you can also convert them. So I have a custom pipe actually, which I'm going to open now. It's called Outr Pads because I use it with my Outr Pads controller. And in this, instead of CC64, I'm having this send CC123, which is a notes off message. And I'm sure you've been there. You are on stage, you're performing, and you get one of those hanging MIDI notes. So what do? You just send a all notes off message. So it works like this, press a note, Let me actually show you. So I'm gonna use the A-list module again, and I'm gonna add it just before the output, deactivate time sensing. And if I press the sustain button, instead of CC64, you will now see CC123. There we go, all notes off. And instead of portamento, I have CC103 apparently, which in Vital, I have assigned to this format filter. As you can see, when I press the button, the filter moves upwards. And the effect is something like this. So this is very nice to accentuate some parts like maybe in conjunction with vibrato as well. And having buttons instead of sliders or knobs isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I could do this with a button. That would not be possible with a slider, right? With vibrato as well, I don't find myself missing having an extra wheel. So yeah, that's the effect section. And then we have rhythm control. And the chord sequencer actually does the same thing, which is they send playback start, stop, and tempo messages. Let me close Vital here. And in Ableton, so long as you have enabled the sync function on your MIDI controller, you can benefit from those features as well. So remember to turn this on if you're using Ableton, and then you want to activate the external sync switch as well. Now Ableton is listening for MIDI clock messages sent from your MIDI controller, your SHS-200 or SHS-10. And so if I press start, stop, yeah, as you can see, this triggered the accompaniment as well. And in fact, let me mute Vital. Let me turn up the volume of the SHS a bit. And if I press start, stop here, it triggers the accompaniment track. So if you just want to use it for start, stop, we can check which channel this information is being sent on. It appears to be channel 16. So we just need to set our track here to only listen to MIDI notes on channel 1. Boom, we can start playback and we can stop it as well. And any one of the chord sequence buttons does the same as well. Start, stop. Okay, these only start, apparently. Yeah, no stop there. So you need to stop with the stop button actually. Oh, and the same goes for the intro fill buttons. So, and then this is interesting, the synchro start ending button will make it so that playback starts whenever you actually press a note. So if I press this button, playback isn't going to start just yet, but as soon as I press a note, playback starts as well. So you might have noticed that the tempo value here is grayed out. That means we have no control over it from within Ableton, and that is because Ableton is listening to an external clock. So all we can do here is we can again make use of one of these parameter change buttons here, which again, they don't actually send out MIDI information, but they change how other parameters do. So in this case, we can control the tempo, right? I select the tempo, we can go slower, all the way up to -19 it seems. And I press start now, notice how the BPM value is going to go down to 54-ish. As you can see, it kind of oscillates a bit. It's 54.10 now. Now it went down to 54.06. So not super stable. Let's bring it up again to maybe 5-ish, see what happens. And now we are at 150. And again, it oscillates. Now it's 152, now 153. So, ooh, of course, I was trying to stop playback with my spacebar, but that doesn't work. I have to press stop here. So I think this is a pretty cool feature, to be honest, especially the synchro start and ending function. But as you can see, it's not super stable. The MIDI sync signal has been lost. I reckon this probably has to do with two things. Number one, we are using MIDI clock. MIDI timecode would probably be a little better, but this thing doesn't support it. So we're stuck with MIDI clock. And also I have a very large pipe, as you can see here. I am using my iRig pads, which is offline, it's not connected at the moment, and I'm doing a bunch of conversion there. I also have the Blue board, which isn't connected, and then finally I have the MIDI master. So the more devices you have going through the same pipe, the more there is a risk that MIDI clock messages get lost. So I reckon if I were to use this, maybe without a pipe at all, like just directly selecting it among the inputs in Ableton, then maybe my clock messages would be more stable. But I don't worry about it because because I don't use this feature. And the reason is I need to have very specific BPM values for songs I play during my live performances. And so having something that, even if it were stable, it would still oscillate a bit around approximate values. That's just not good enough for me. I mean, sure, you can accelerate and decelerate, but if I want to go to 120, then what exactly is 120? You know, is it 3? Is it 1? I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, if you don't worry that much about BPMs, then it sure as hell is pretty cool that you can actually start playback of your backing tracks by just pressing a note, you know? Good, so that's the rhythm control and the chord sequencer section. Next we have the voice style select, and what this does on the synth, let me mute Vital and turn up the volume here a bit. So you click on voice and then you just press a number. So that's voice number 44 and this is voice number 11. You switch between the different voices on your synth, and style does the same thing for backing tracks. Right? So that's what it does on your synth. But in terms of MIDI that's being sent, if we have a look here, look at that. It sends out program change messages. How cool is that? So if you have a synth or sampler that actually reacts to those, you can change presets on the fly. Like you want to select the first preset, press 00, there you go. When I select the second preset, press 01, and as you can see, it sends that kind of program change message, which is pretty cool. Now, the weird thing about it, the only weird thing about it is that it goes up to number 6. So if you select 06, that's program change number 6. If you want to select 7, it's actually 10 on the SHS, right? And so 11 is 8, 12 is 9, and so on and so forth. So the max number you can send out is number 66 on the SHS, which is number 48 in terms of actual program change messages. So, but still, that's 48 presets you get access to on the fly. Now, Vital, as you can see, we just threw a whole bunch of different program change messages to it, but it's still stuck on shred. And that is because it doesn't react to program change messages. It's not a feature that has been implemented. And there has been some discussion about this on the forums, and I really hope that the developer behind it gets to implement the feature in a future release. I would love to be able to select different presets directly from my controller, but so far that is not possible. There is a workaround, however, and it again implies using some of the parameter change buttons here. Let's just quickly go through the other ones. So these two, tuning and accompaniment volume, they don't really influence any other parameter that sends out MIDI information, but MIDI channel does, and that is the actual MIDI channel of whatever control. So right now we are on 1. Now you can see the channel is 1. We change this to, I don't know, 5. The channel is 5. And the same goes for our controls. They are now on channel 5 as well. So you could have your solo sound on channel 1, and then you can have a separate track, set it to channel number 5, and maybe you get a different kind of sound on there, like a pad. Right? So the beautiful thing about this is once you select a parameter to change, it's gonna be locked, right? It will stay on MIDI channel all the time. So you could just press MIDI channel at the beginning of the show, and from that moment on, whatever you do with the plus and minus keys is only gonna affect the MIDI channel. So right now I'm gonna set this to 5. And as you can see, we are controlling the pads on channel number 5, and track number 2, which is responding to channel number 1, is not reacting. Set this back to 1. For some reason, nothing is being played back. Oh, there we go. Oh, I see, because I needed to record enable the track. So I can easily fix that by setting the tracks to monitoring. So now I don't need to select them to be able to play them, right? And so you see where this is going. You could have up to 16 different presets, each on its own track, and access them on the fly by switching the MIDI channel, which is kind of cool. So now we've looked at this section as well, the parameter change section. What else do we have? We have the mode section, right? And this actually only pertains to how you can play melodies and chords and backing tracks. So it's just internal parameters of this synth, no MIDI information being sent, as you can see. Then you have the demo, which is of course a demo song, but the MIDI notes of the demo song are actually being sent out. So as As you can see, lots of stuff happening there. Good, so that's it as far as parameters that are common to both the SHS-10 and the SHS-200. Now there's a couple bonus features on the SHS-200. First, you have stereo symphonic, which does nothing for us in terms of MIDI, and what it does in terms of the sound is basically it takes advantage of the two speakers and it introduces a very slight detuning between the left and the right channel so that you have this wide stereo image, whereas when you set it to mono, everything is collapsed to the center. Now the SHS-10 only has one speaker, so it doesn't have this feature. That's that. But then what's of particular interest to us is this double hand play versus single hand play button. And when you set it to single hand, the idea is that you use your right hand to play notes, right? Okay. And then with your left hand, you apply pitch bend and effects on the fly. Right? I think that is the mode that the SHS-10 works in. It makes sense because you only have about 2 octaves, so not much you can do with 2 hands, but you do actually have a double hand mode as well. And the idea is that you use both hands, you can play a melody and an accompaniment. And whenever you need to apply an effect, you don't want to be pressing the button all the time. You want to just quickly press it, release your hand, the effect still being active, then you continue your playing, and when it comes time to deactivate it, you just want to press the button and release it a second time. It's a bit like guitar pedals work, right? So to give you an idea, right? As you can see here as well, upon pressing and releasing the first time, only a value of 127 is being sent, which means the effect is active. And when I press and release the button a second time, the value sent is 0. So this might be useful as well. It's always good to have this feature. For the most part, I'm using this to play solos. That means single hand play. Okay, so I hope this was helpful to you. If it was, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any more questions, just leave a comment. I'll be happy to help. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video next week. Take care.